The moment that still burns in my chest didn't happen in a courtroom or during a family argument, it happened under warm chandelier lights, surrounded by applause, champagne flutes, and people who believed they were better than me. I remember standing there, frozen, when a man in a tailored suit with a law school pin on his lapel looked straight at me and said, without lowering his voice, "Excuse me, could you sweep the floor near the podium? We need this place spotless before the dean arrives." The room kept buzzing as if nothing had happened, but for me, time slowed down. My ears rang. My palms went cold. In that instant, I wasn't a person anymore. I was a role they assigned me without asking, without knowing my name, without imagining how badly they had misjudged who I was. This was my sister's law school event, the kind of polished academic reception where everyone wore confidence like a second skin. My parents were glowing, my sister was being praised as the next legal star, and I stood there invisible, blending into the background because I wasn't wearing what they expected power to look like. I wasn't in a suit. I wasn't holding a glass of champagne. I was holding a broom, because someone had placed it in my hands earlier, assuming I belonged with the staff. And the worst part wasn't that a stranger made that assumption, it was that my own family saw it happen and didn't say a word. I had flown in for this event believing, foolishly, that maybe this time things would be different. Maybe this time I wouldn't be the forgotten daughter, the inconvenient reminder that not all success looks flashy at first glance. My parents barely greeted me when I arrived. My sister hugged me quickly, her eyes already scanning the room for more important people. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was there to support her, to keep the peace, to survive one evening without reopening old wounds. But humiliation has a way of tearing open scars you thought had healed. As I stood there with that broom, I felt every childhood memory rushing back. Every dinner where my accomplishments were brushed aside. Every time my parents compared me to my sister and said, "Why can't you be more like her?" Every moment I was told to be patient, to be quiet, to not make a scene. The professor who had spoken to me didn't even look embarrassed. To him, I was furniture. Useful, replaceable, forgettable. And the room full of future lawyers, judges, and scholars didn't notice the injustice unfolding right in front of them. What no one in that room knew, what made the moment almost unbearable, was that I understood exactly how power worked. I understood hierarchy, perception, and how quickly dignity can be stripped away when people think they outrank you. I had spent years learning that lesson the hard way. And as I bent down, pretending to sweep the floor, I made a decision that would change everything. I would not correct them. I would not explain myself. I would let them finish the performance they had so confidently started. I swept slowly, deliberately, my heart pounding as laughter echoed nearby. I overheard snippets of conversation about prestigious internships, future partnerships, judges' recommendations. My sister's name was mentioned again and again, followed by proud nods from my parents. I wondered if any of them remembered that I had once dreamed too, that I had once believed intelligence and integrity would be enough to earn respect. Instead, here I was, being erased in plain sight. The professor walked away satisfied, convinced the problem was solved. My mother glanced at me briefly, her expression tight, uncomfortable, but she said nothing. That silence hurt more than the command itself. It told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in this family. I wasn't a daughter in that room. I was an inconvenience they hoped would stay quiet until the night was over. But as I kept sweeping, my mind sharpened. This wasn't just humiliation, it was exposure. It was proof of how easily people reveal who they are when they think no consequences exist. And I promised myself something right there on that polished marble floor: they would remember this night. Not because I would scream or cry or storm out, but because I would wait. Because I knew something they didn't. And because silence, when used correctly, can be far more powerful than outrage. As I kept sweeping that immaculate floor, my mind drifted backward, stitching together moments I had spent years trying not to examine too closely. This wasn't an isolated humiliation. It was a pattern, one my family had perfected over decades, subtle enough to deny, sharp enough to wound. Growing up, my sister had always been the centerpiece. Teachers praised her, relatives bragged about her, my parents built their dreams around her success as if it were a group project we were all meant to admire from the sidelines. I learned early that love in my household was conditional. It came with performance reviews, comparisons, and quiet disappointment when I didn't fit the narrative they preferred to tell about our family. I wasn't lazy or incapable. I studied hard, worked harder, and learned to survive without applause. But I wasn't flashy, and I wasn't interested in becoming a trophy. While my sister thrived on attention, I learned how to read rooms, how to observe people when they thought no one important was watching. I noticed how my parents' smiles changed depending on who was present, how their pride was louder in public than in private. When my sister announced she was going to law school, they treated it like a coronation. When I shared my own achievements, they nodded politely and changed the subject. Standing there at that event, broom in hand, I realized something painful but clarifying. My family wasn't embarrassed because I was being mistaken for staff. They were embarrassed because my presence complicated the image they wanted to project. I didn't fit into the picture of effortless prestige they were selling to professors, donors, and colleagues. Correcting the mistake would have required acknowledging me, and acknowledgement had always been something they rationed carefully. I watched my sister across the room, laughing with her classmates, soaking in admiration. She noticed me then. Our eyes met for half a second. I waited for a flicker of recognition, a hint of discomfort, anything that suggested she might step in and say, "That's my sister." Instead, she looked away. That moment settled something in me that had been unsettled for years. Whatever loyalty I still hoped for from her dissolved quietly, without drama, without tears. What made it worse was how natural the humiliation felt. I knew exactly how to stand, how to keep my expression neutral, how to disappear just enough to avoid drawing more attention. I had practiced this role my whole life. The professor's assumption wasn't random, it was enabled by a lifetime of being positioned as lesser, quieter, easier to overlook. And yet, beneath that calm exterior, something inside me was changing. I wasn't shrinking. I was observing. I was memorizing faces, tones, and names. As the event continued, the speeches began. Professors spoke about ethics, integrity, justice, words that echoed hollowly in my ears as I swept beneath their polished shoes. They praised the future of the legal profession while ignoring a very real act of disrespect unfolding in front of them. The irony wasn't lost on me. I wondered how many injustices went unnoticed every day simply because the wrong people were deemed unimportant. By the time applause filled the room again, I felt oddly steady. The humiliation had stopped feeling personal and started feeling instructive. I understood now that this night wasn't about my sister's achievement alone. It was about power, perception, and who society grants the benefit of dignity. And more importantly, it was about timing. Because while they believed this was the moment they defined me, I knew it was only the moment I let them reveal themselves. I set the broom against the wall and straightened my posture. No one stopped me. No one questioned why the help had finished early. That silence told me everything. And as I walked toward the back of the room, I made another promise to myself. When my name was finally spoken, when the truth surfaced, it wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be messy. It would be precise. And it would be unforgettable. As I stepped away from the crowd and leaned against the cool marble wall near the back corridor, the noise of the reception dulled into a distant hum, like static behind glass. That was when the weight of everything I had buried for years finally pressed against my chest. Not in a way that made me want to cry or scream, but in a way that forced clarity. People often assume silence means weakness, but silence can also mean strategy. I had learned that lesson early, long before law ever entered my life. In my family, asking for space was seen as ingratitude, and defending yourself was framed as disrespect. So I learned to wait. To listen. To let people underestimate me while I gathered the facts they never imagined I was collecting. What no one in that room knew, not the professor, not my sister's classmates, not even most of my family, was that I hadn't stumbled into that event by accident. I wasn't there as a guest out of obligation alone. I had received my own invitation weeks earlier, quietly slipped into my email by the university administration. I hadn't mentioned it to my parents because I already knew how they would react. They would ask questions that weren't really questions, offer congratulations that felt like audits, and somehow twist the moment back into something about my sister. It was easier to let them believe I was just tagging along, invisible as usual. I thought back to the years after college, when I worked 2 jobs while studying at night, when I learned to read legal language the way some people read novels. I remembered the exhaustion, the humiliation of being talked down to by people who had never read a statute in their lives, the constant pressure to justify my ambition. Law wasn't a dream handed to me on a silver platter. It was something I fought for in quiet rooms, with cold coffee and borrowed time. And yet, standing there in that hallway, I realized that struggle had given me something my sister didn't have: perspective. A faculty member passed by and nodded at me absent-mindedly, still assuming I was part of the cleaning crew. I returned the nod, polite and unbothered. What he couldn't see was that I knew his name, his published work, and the cases he'd cited incorrectly in a recent lecture that had circulated online. I knew the difference between authority and competence, between confidence and credibility. And that knowledge settled me. The humiliation of being mistaken for someone else no longer felt like an insult. It felt like camouflage. When I returned to the main hall, the dean had taken the stage. The room quieted, and anticipation thickened the air. Names were about to be called. Futures were about to be announced. I spotted my parents near the front, my mother adjusting her posture, my father scanning the crowd like an investor assessing returns. They hadn't looked in my direction once. Not even to check if I was still working. The realization stung, but it also freed me. You can't disappoint people who were never really rooting for you. As the dean spoke about excellence and perseverance, my phone buzzed softly in my pocket. A single message. "You're up sooner than expected." I didn't check who it was from. I didn't need to. I felt a strange calm spread through me, the kind that comes right before something irreversible. I took a breath and looked around the room one last time, memorizing the expressions, the assumptions, the hierarchy everyone believed was fixed. They thought they knew who I was because they thought they knew my place. They thought the story had already been written. But stories change when new information enters the record. And as the dean adjusted his glasses and prepared to continue, I realized something with absolute certainty: by the end of the night, no one in that room would ever look at me the same way again. The dean cleared his throat and continued speaking, his voice steady and rehearsed, the kind of tone meant to inspire without ever getting too personal. He spoke about sacrifice, about late nights and relentless pressure, about how only a few truly understood what it took to reach that stage. As he talked, I watched my sister straighten in her chair, soaking it all in like sunlight, already imagining how she would retell this moment later with herself at the center of every sentence. My parents leaned in as well, nodding along, their pride loud even in silence. They had invested heavily in this version of the story, the gifted daughter, the perfect trajectory, the family legacy. And they had never once considered what it cost me to stand just a few feet away, unseen. Names began to be called, one after another, each followed by applause, laughter, sometimes tears. The rhythm of it was hypnotic. With every name, I felt the tension in my body shift, not increase, but sharpen, like a blade being slowly drawn. I wasn't nervous in the way people expect. I wasn't afraid of being exposed. I was afraid of how much this moment would finally clarify things, for them, not for me. Because I already knew the truth. I had lived it quietly for years. The question was whether they were ready to hear it spoken out loud. Halfway through the list, The professor who had earlier told me to sweep the floor took a seat near the stage, still holding his program, still unaware. I caught a glimpse of his face as he scanned the room, and I wondered how many times he had mistaken humility for insignificance in his career. How many capable people he had dismissed because they didn't fit his mental picture of success. Institutions love to talk about merit, but they often confuse polish with worth. That confusion was about to become very uncomfortable for him. When my sister's name was finally called, the applause was thunderous. My parents stood, clapping too hard, too fast, as if volume could compensate for something deeper. My sister walked across the stage glowing, triumphant, already performing the role she believed she was born for. Cameras flashed. The moment was pristine. And for a brief second, I felt the old familiar pull, the instinct to shrink, to step further back, to make myself smaller so her spotlight could stay undisturbed. But that instinct was gone. It had burned out years ago. As my sister shook hands and posed for photos, the dean raised his hand again, signaling for quiet. "Before we conclude," he said, "there are a few additional recognitions to be announced." The room settled. Programs rustled. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. I felt my phone vibrate once more, like a pulse matching my heartbeat. This was it. The part no one had planned for. The footnote that was about to become the headline. The dean adjusted his glasses and read from the card in his hand. He spoke about academic distinction beyond enrollment status, about individuals whose contributions to the legal field and to the institution extended past traditional paths. I noticed my mother frown slightly, already impatient, already uninterested. This wasn't about her daughter. It wasn't about her family. And then the dean said my name. For a moment, I honestly thought I had imagined it. That my mind, exhausted from years of restraint, had finally slipped. But then I heard it again, clearer this time, echoed through the microphone and into every corner of the room. My full name. Pronounced carefully. Respectfully. The kind of pronunciation reserved for someone who mattered. The silence that followed was immediate and total. My parents froze. My sister turned halfway, confusion cracking her expression. The professor's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me, still standing where he had last seen me holding a broom. Recognition dawned slowly, painfully. I felt dozens of eyes shift in unison, trying to reconcile the person they thought I was with the name they had just heard. I stepped forward, not rushing, not apologizing, not explaining. Each step felt deliberate, grounded. I wasn't walking toward the stage to prove anything. I was walking because I belonged there. And as the distance between me and the spotlight closed, I could feel it, the moment the narrative slipped out of their control. They had mocked me without asking questions. They had judged me without context. They had assumed my role in their story was fixed. But law, more than anything else, teaches you this: assumptions collapse the moment evidence enters the room. And that night, I was living proof. I could feel the room holding its breath as I reached the edge of the stage, the kind of collective pause that only happens when people realize they may have been wrong in a way they can't undo. The dean smiled at me, not the polite smile he had given the graduates, but one filled with recognition and quiet respect. He extended his hand and said my name again, slower this time, as if anchoring it into the space so no one could pretend they hadn't heard it correctly. I shook his hand, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my bones. This wasn't triumph in the loud, cinematic sense. It was something steadier, something earned through endurance rather than applause. The dean began to explain why I was being called forward, and with every sentence, I watched my parents' posture change. He spoke about my work in legal research, about my contributions to ongoing cases, about the hours spent behind the scenes where no cameras were present and no praise was given. He mentioned federal filings, ethics committees, and cases that had quietly shaped policy without ever making headlines. Each word peeled back another layer of the version of me my family had chosen to believe in, the one that was convenient, diminished, easy to dismiss. My sister's smile faded completely now, replaced by something brittle and confused, like a mask cracking under pressure. I glanced briefly toward the professor who had told me to sweep the floor. He sat rigid in his chair, his face drained of color, his program forgotten in his lap. It wasn't rage I felt toward him. It was something colder and more instructive. He wasn't cruel because he was powerful. He was careless because he thought he was. Institutions give people just enough authority to forget curiosity, and he had worn that authority like armor. Tonight, it failed him. When the dean finished, the applause came slowly at first, scattered and uncertain, then grew into something fuller, louder, unavoidable. I didn't bow my head. I didn't smile too widely. I let it wash over me without drinking it in. Validation is intoxicating, but I had learned a long time ago not to depend on it. What mattered was that the truth was no longer private. It had crossed the threshold into public space, where it could no longer be rewritten to suit someone else's narrative. As I accepted the certificate, my mother finally stood up. I saw her lips move before I heard her voice, cutting through the applause with forced enthusiasm. "That's my daughter," she said, too loudly, too late. The words landed flat. They didn't belong to her anymore. Parenthood doesn't give you ownership over someone's accomplishments, especially when you spent years dismissing the labor that produced them. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. The distance between us was no longer emotional. It was structural. After the ceremony, the reception resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted irreversibly. Conversations stopped when I passed. People recalibrated in real time, reassessing every earlier assumption, every casual glance, every unspoken hierarchy they had accepted without question. The same guests who had avoided eye contact before now smiled too eagerly, asked too many questions, suddenly interested in my work, my background, my future. Respect, I realized, is often less about values and more about positioning. Once your position changes, so does everyone's behavior. My sister approached me near the refreshment table, her graduation robe half open, her voice tight with controlled frustration. She congratulated me, the word heavy with resentment she couldn't fully hide. She asked why I hadn't told anyone. The question almost made me laugh. I told her the truth instead. That I had learned a long time ago that explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me was a waste of energy. That if someone wanted to know me, they would ask, not assume. Behind her, my father watched silently, his expression unreadable. He had always believed power came from control, from deciding who mattered and who didn't. That belief was unraveling now, thread by thread. And for the first time, he looked unsure of where he stood. I left the reception early, not because I was unwelcome, but because I was finished. Finished proving, finished shrinking, finished waiting for permission. As I walked out of the building, the night air felt lighter, cleaner. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't defended myself. I had simply let the truth arrive on its own schedule. And it wasn't done yet. The days after the graduation event didn't explode the way people imagine justice should. There were no dramatic confrontations, no shouted apologies, no emotional confessions under warm lighting. What happened instead was quieter, and far more devastating. The phone calls began almost immediately, but not with remorse. They came with confusion, with awkward pauses, with voices trying to sound casual while fishing for reassurance. My parents wanted to know why colleagues were suddenly distant, why invitations had stopped arriving, why people were asking uncomfortable questions about how they treated their own daughter. Reputation is a fragile thing when it's built on curated appearances, and once a crack forms, it spreads fast. I didn't answer right away. Silence, I had learned, forces people to sit with themselves. Eventually, my mother left a voicemail that said everything without meaning to. She told me the professor from the event had reached out to the family, embarrassed, apologetic, eager to explain himself. She said it like it was a favor being done to me, like his discomfort somehow balanced years of dismissal. She suggested I should smooth things over, for the sake of the family, as if the family had ever protected me when it mattered. I deleted the message without responding. Peace built on self-erasure isn't peace. It's surrender. At work, the ripple effect was different. Colleagues who had known my work but never fully grasped my background now saw the contrast clearly. They saw the discipline it takes to succeed without safety nets, without applause, without emotional support. Opportunities opened not because I asked, but because people finally understood the weight I had been carrying quietly. Recognition didn't change me, but it changed how others listened when I spoke. And that difference mattered. My sister stopped calling entirely. At first, I wondered if she was angry or ashamed, but eventually I realized something more unsettling: she was recalculating. For the first time, I was no longer useful as a comparison point. I was no longer the less accomplished sibling she could reference to feel superior. Without that contrast, she didn't know where she stood. Some people don't hate you, they just need you beneath them. When you rise, they don't know how to relate to you at all. Weeks passed, and with each one, the version of my family that had relied on my compliance weakened. They couldn't rewrite what had happened. Too many people had seen it. Too many assumptions had collapsed in public. And while no one confronted them directly, the shift was unmistakable. Invitations dried up. Conversations shortened. Their social world quietly corrected itself. Accountability doesn't always come with handcuffs. Sometimes it comes with distance. One evening, my father finally asked to meet. "Just coffee," he said. Neutral ground. I agreed, not out of hope, but out of closure. He arrived early, dressed carefully, posture rigid. He talked about pride, about misunderstandings, about intentions that came out wrong. He never said the words, "I'm sorry." Instead, he asked if I could move past it. That was the moment I understood him completely. He didn't want reconciliation. He wanted relief. I told him the truth, calmly and without heat, that moving past something requires acknowledgement first, and that I wasn't interested in carrying other people's discomfort anymore. I left before he finished his coffee. Outside, the city hummed on, indifferent and steady. Life doesn't pause for family drama. It moves forward, rewarding those who adapt and leaving behind those who cling to old hierarchies. For the first time, I felt fully aligned with that movement. And still, the story wasn't finished. Because the most powerful shift wasn't external. It was internal. Something subtle but irreversible changed inside me after that meeting with my father. It wasn't relief, and it wasn't anger either. It was clarity. The kind that settles in quietly and rearranges everything without asking permission. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head. I stopped imagining what I would say if they finally understood me. I realized that understanding was never the missing piece. Respect was. And respect doesn't come from better explanations, it comes from boundaries that don't move. I began to notice how often I had softened my presence in the past. How I had smiled through discomfort, nodded through disrespect, allowed people to mislabel me because correcting them felt exhausting. That version of me had been trained, slowly and deliberately, to prioritize harmony over honesty. Letting go of her felt like grief at first. She had protected me when I needed protection. But she was no longer necessary. The woman I was becoming didn't need to disappear to survive. At work, I started speaking with the same calm authority I had always reserved for private spaces. I stopped over-preparing for meetings, stopped padding my words with qualifiers meant to make others comfortable. And the world adjusted. Not everyone liked it. Some people mistook my composure for coldness, my boundaries for arrogance. I let them. You don't owe softness to people who benefited from your silence. My family tried again, in smaller ways. A holiday invitation framed as an olive branch. A text message pretending nothing had changed. An article forwarded with the caption, "Thought of you." Each one carried the same unspoken request: come back to the version of yourself we know how to handle. I declined without drama. No speeches. No explanations. Just distance, clean and intentional. Distance is not punishment. It's protection. The strangest part was how peaceful it felt. I had been taught that cutting people off was cruel, that loyalty meant endurance, that love required tolerance of harm. None of that held up under scrutiny. Real love doesn't ask you to shrink. Real family doesn't confuse obedience with respect. I wasn't angry anymore because anger requires engagement. I had moved beyond that. I was present in my own life in a way I never had been before. One afternoon, weeks later, I received an email from the law school. A formal apology. Carefully worded, legally vetted, unmistakably late. The professor who had told me to sweep the floor had been placed on administrative leave pending review. They thanked me for my grace. I stared at the word for a long moment before closing the message. Grace isn't something institutions earn by correcting themselves after public embarrassment. Grace is what individuals give when they choose not to burn everything down, even when they could. I didn't forward the email to my family. I didn't post it. I didn't need witnesses anymore. My sense of justice had shifted. It was no longer about being seen as right. It was about being free. Free from the need to be believed, free from the weight of their expectations, free from the old script that cast me as the supporting character in my own life. That night, I stood in my apartment, city lights spilling through the windows, and felt something close to gratitude. Not for the humiliation, not for the pain, but for the precision of it. That moment at the law school hadn't broken me. It had exposed everything that needed to fall apart. And now, there was only one thing left to do. Finish the story on my terms. The final shift didn't come with applause or confrontation. It came quietly, on a morning that looked like any other, when I stood in front of the mirror and realized I no longer needed to prove who I was to anyone who had already decided I was beneath them. That realization felt heavier than anger but lighter than fear. It felt earned. For most of my life, I had been reacting, adjusting my tone, my posture, my ambition, trying to fit into rooms that only valued me when I was invisible. That chapter closed the moment I stopped needing their permission to exist fully. A few months later, the law school invited me back. This time, not as a guest, not as family of, and certainly not as someone to be mistaken for staff. They invited me as a keynote speaker for a symposium on ethics, bias, and professional accountability. The irony was sharp enough to taste. I accepted without hesitation. Not because I needed closure, but because I wanted to stand exactly where I had once been humiliated, and stand there as myself, unapologetically. The day of the event, I arrived early. The same marble floors. The same echoing halls. Different energy. People nodded at me now, checked name badges twice, spoke carefully. Respect, I learned, often arrives late and out of necessity, not understanding. I walked onto that stage in a tailored suit, my voice steady, my presence undeniable. I didn't mention the incident directly. I didn't need to. Instead, I spoke about assumptions. About how power reveals itself not in who we celebrate, but in who we dismiss without a second thought. About how brilliance is often overlooked when it doesn't arrive wrapped in privilege. I saw it then, the moment it clicked for some of them. The discomfort. The recognition. The quiet shame. I didn't linger on it. Justice doesn't require cruelty to be effective. It requires truth, delivered calmly, without apology. When I finished, the room stood. The applause wasn't explosive. It was deliberate. Respectful. Real. My sister didn't attend. My parents didn't reach out. And for the first time, that absence felt like peace instead of loss. I had outgrown the version of myself that waited for their validation. Some relationships don't end in explosions. They end in irrelevance. And that's okay. Later that evening, as I walked alone through the city, I thought back to that moment, the professor, the broom, the humiliation that had burned so deeply I could still feel it in my chest months later. I understood something then that I wish someone had told me earlier: humiliation only has power when you accept the role it assigns you. The moment you refuse it, it becomes evidence, not of your weakness, but of someone else's blindness. I didn't rise by shouting. I didn't win by revenge. I survived by patience, clarity, and the refusal to become smaller for the comfort of people who never intended to see me clearly. And that, more than any apology or recognition, was the victory. If this story feels personal, it's because it is. Not just mine, but yours, too. Anyone who has ever been underestimated, mislabeled, humiliated in a room they deserve to be respected in knows this feeling. And if you're in that place right now, hear this clearly: you don't need to correct them today. You don't need to fight every battle out loud. Sometimes the most powerful move is to keep going, gathering strength, and letting time and truth do the work for you. Because one day, they will hear your name called, and it will change everything. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been judged by appearances and lived to prove them wrong?